Now that we've built the ideal profile and detailed out all of your work experience, let's look at everything else on the resume. I've lumped everything else together because these are really supporting points that elaborate more on what you put in the other sections or just provide more detail and justification for why you're a great fit for the job. So in this section, we're going to go through a few different points. We'll go through education, your highlights, your certifications, your publications, presentations or speaking engagements, organizational affiliations, skills, and volunteer experience. It's very likely that you'll only use a few of these on your resume. Very few people will ever include all of these points when they're writing their resume. So pick and choose which ones apply best to your situation and use those on your resume. I've included most of these within the resume template. If there are things like volunteer experience that aren't on the template, you can replace one of the other unused sections with this volunteer experience if that's something you need to add to your resume. Or if you need to add volunteer experience and you're keeping everything else on this list, go ahead and make a copy of one of the other sections, label it volunteer experience instead of, for instance, publications. All right, now let's get into everything else. First, education. So this is best for any post-high school education. You're going to list here the college or university name, your degree type, and the concentration. I'll give different examples throughout this entire section so you can get a feel for what things are applicable for certain roles. So in this case, a data analyst position, sample education could be University of Virginia, BS Mathematics. There's no need to put the year on here. Maybe you also have a master's degree. In that case, NC State, MS Analytics. If you have more than one or two degrees, you can include them all here. Next, let's move on to highlights. A highlights section's another great section for people that are mid to senior career or are changing careers. Actually, it's really great for most people in general. If you're early in your career and have had some major accomplishments, you could definitely include this section. This is your chance to highlight your 3 to 4 best measurable career achievements. If possible, use some of the same words from the job description. This will make it easier for the recruiter or hiring manager to connect your past achievements with the expectations of the position. When you're writing your highlights, there's 3 areas where we're going to focus. We're going to focus on how you've saved money, how you've generated revenue, and how you've optimized infrastructure or processes. This is very similar to what we did in the work experience, except we're picking out the 3 to 4 most stellar standout highlights from your career. So what might those look like? Well, let's look at the same examples that we looked at when we wrote the career profile. First, let's look at a sample for a data analyst. Sample highlights here could be 98% accuracy on predictive financial models, saved $1 million through earlier detection of part failure, increased productivity by 10% through increased automation. So here we've highlighted things that speak to accuracy, that speak to saving money, and we've measured them in different ways. We've also talked about process efficiency through the increase in productivity. So these are great points to highlight for a data analyst. Now, what if we take our other example? In this case, our other example for the profile was customer service representative. Here's what highlights might look like for that person. 10% call time reduction due to quick solving checklists. 30% increase in customer satisfaction due to new service strategy, and 5% reduction in callbacks due to better first-time solutions. So these are fantastic highlights that, again, have some measure. You're able to quantify exactly what your contribution had been. In some cases, you may find it difficult to put an actual number on everything, so try to estimate as best you can. Use the most realistic estimate that you can to quantify all of these different contributions that you've made and highlight them to the person reading your resume. Now, let's move on to certifications. Do you have any relevant certifications which you could include on your resume? Certifications that display additional mastery or expertise and are relevant to the job for which you're applying should be added. You do want to omit irrelevant certifications. So if you're working in an analytical position, but in the past you had received your esthetician's license, you would want to leave that off your analytics resume. While it may have been an accomplishment for you, it's not relevant to the job, so there's not really a place for it on your resume. The other thing to omit is basic system proficiency. So what I mean by this is Microsoft Excel skills, Microsoft Word skills. Unless these things are heavily referenced in the job description, any hiring manager is going to assume that you have these skills. While these may have been standard to put on your resume 10 to 15 years ago, there's now an expectation if you're in a job where you're using a computer, you've got the basics down. Another thing to keep in mind with certifications, write out the certification and include the acronym. So why do this? If someone's not incredibly familiar with the certification you have, the acronym's not going to mean anything to them. And in some cases, people may actually be more familiar with the acronym than the full name. So including both just makes it really easy for the person to connect with the certification you have. It's also great because when your resume gets screened by applicant tracking systems, this writing out and abbreviation of the certification makes sure that if it's a targeted word to look for a match, that you definitely score as a match on that point. Let's look at a few sample certifications. First, data analyst. Sample certification here could be SAS certified base programmer. Next, project manager. Sample experience here for certification could be project management professional or PMP. I didn't put an acronym on the first position certification because there isn't a common acronym that's used for this. I did, however, on the second because PMP is a common abbreviation. Our third position for nonprofit fundraiser. Sample certification here could be certified nonprofit professional or CNP. Think about the industry that you're trying to get into or that you're advancing your career in to decide which certifications are relevant to include here. Now, let's move on to publications. Publications are great to include on your resume if you're applying for a job that requires publication or writing, or if the material content is relevant to your job. If either of these are the case, then you'll want to include publication name and organization within your resume. A few things to keep in mind here. The content of your publication should be relevant to the new position or industry in some way. Again, if it's that you deal a lot with publication or writing, try to pick the most relevant publications to the new job that you're applying for. These can also create additional credibility. These credibility markers show that you have experience and you're actually publishing information to the industry, which at least suggests that there's third-party verification of your skills and knowledge. So sample publications for a data analyst might look like an article called Using Machine Learning to Reduce Mosquito Populations and published in Informs Analytics magazine. There are thousands, if not millions, of different places where publications could have taken place. So if you've had works published in the past, think about those. If they're relevant to the job, include them on your resume. Similar to publications are presentations or speeches. Again, these are great where the job that you're applying for requires these skills or where the content is relevant to the job. So the content here, again, similar to publications, include the presentation or speech name and the organization or conference where you gave the speech. A sample here would be for a data analyst, data visualization with Excel, and this was given at the Data Science Conference 2016. If you have multiple presentations or speeches, you can list them here. You don't have to reference every presentation or speech that you've given. Definitely omit ones that were associated with a class that weren't at some sort of conference or other recognized event. And pick out the highlights. If you've given a dozen speeches in your life, pick out one or two that are meaningful and most relevant to the position. Professional organizations. These are best for any relevant affiliations that you have. And with that, you'll include the name of the professional organization and your title. Again, relevant affiliations only. And if you've been really involved in this area, you may want to include a line under your work experience that goes into more detail, especially if you've had significant responsibility in that position. Here's a sample professional organization related to a data analyst, SAS Northwest Users Group. And here I've also put the years, 2015 to present. So this isn't just something that the affiliation was 10 years ago, it's a relevant and current professional organization that you're involved with. Now, let's look at skills. Skills are best for technical roles, and the content type should be bullet points. Show most of your skills within your work experience. So we've talked about this a bit already. Putting your skills in your work experience gives you the opportunity to talk much more about what you've actually done with those skills and demonstrate that you really know how to use them. There is still a place for skills on the resume if you want to include them. It's definitely not the mandatory section that a lot of people used to view it as, though. Keep your points limited and specific. This is not the place to list out 50 different things you can do. This is really a place to be very clear and concise about some key areas where you have expertise. You can list soft and hard skills, and so soft skills would be people skills, leadership skills, whereas hard skills would be more software and whatnot. But especially on the soft skills, these are things that should be very clear within the work experience. Again, this is best for technical skills and software. So if you're talking about soft skills like leadership or people relationships, show what you've accomplished with those within your work experience. And don't list that you're a good communicator under your skills. If you're a good communicator, it's going to come across on your resume. There's no reason to list it here. So what are some sample skills that you might include? Using our data analyst as a continued example, you might include SAS programming, Python, and Microsoft Power BI. Notice that this is a short list, and I've been pretty specific about the software applications where the skills are. Now, our last section in the everything else category is volunteer experience. So this is best where you have relevant experience or you're showing leadership. Include the position and the company, and if you've had extensive volunteer experience where you're taking on a lot of leadership activity or really driving the organization, then include this within your work experience. Let's look at some sample volunteer experience in the space of a data analyst. Here, the sample volunteer experience could be facilitator for Girls Who Code in the DC chapter 2017 to present. Similar to a lot of the other topics that we've talked about, we're including the years here to show that it's still very relevant volunteer experience. If you used to volunteer a lot, but you haven't done it in the past 5 to 10 years, it might be time to take that off your resume. Here's another sample volunteer experience in this area. Volunteer, Code for Good, 2015 to 2017. So even though this isn't a volunteer experience that's happening currently today, it's recent enough that it's good to put on the resume. It shows that you are involved in some work-related things outside of the workplace that are building your skills and building your connections in the industry. These would be really positive volunteer experiences to include within your resume. This takes us through all of the different sections that could possibly be on your resume, aside from, in very niche cases, things like security clearances or other very, very specific things for your industry. This wraps up all of the different sections that may be on your resume. Now it's time to put it to work. In the resources for this section, you'll find a workbook where you can go through and fill in all of your information for these different areas. The sample experience and skills are listed within this workbook, so you can reference those as you write your own. Use it to sketch out what you want to include on your resume or what you might want to include on your resume. And when you're ready to go, let's move on to the next section and put it all together.